afternoon, I'm Modern Warfare Historian and welcome back to the Warfare Operation Series Season 1 as we take a look at the Kokoda Trak campaign in Papua New Guinea from 1941 to 1942. Last time we saw that the Allied were able to stop the Japanese in their advance towards Port Moresby, both at Milne Bay and on land on the Kokoda Trak. The Allied are now on the counter-offensive and they have on their side a great asset, logistics. Now let's get started. If you remember, a couple of episodes ago, we saw that a small contingent of the Special Naval Landing Forces were left stranded on Goodenough Island as their ships were attacked by Allied planes. This was because the attack not only badly damaged their transport boats, but also destroyed their radio and most of the supplies. On the 9th of September, they were able to send one man on a canoe to inform other Japanese units of their situation. The Japanese made an attempt to use two destroyers, Yayoi and Isokaze, to save the soldiers, but the ships were attacked by planes and the Yayoi suffered a direct hit on the stern from a bomb dropped by a B-17 Flying Fortress and it sank. Some of the ship's survivors found themselves on Normanby Islands in the same not funny situation as their SNLF mates. The Isokaze returned to the area but found no survivors. On the 22nd, he returned again and with the help of the destroyer Mochizuki, they found 10 men on a launch. On the 26th, the two ships were able to pick up some of the survivors from Normanby Islands. These Japanese sailors were not a threat in the military sense but posed one in the eyes of some Allied commanders to the native population of the island. Therefore, C Company of the 210th Infantry Battalion was dispatched to the island on the destroyer HMAS Stewart on the 21st of September. They were able to capture 8 sailors and safely return to Milne Bay. The Japanese in the meantime were able to airdrop supplies on the 10th and on the 12th of September on Goodenough Island, and the submarine I-1 was able on the 3rd of October to drop off rations, ammunition, medical supplies and a radio. This process was helped by the fact that the submarine had a 46-foot, that's 40 meters, Daihatsu class landing craft installed on the deck that could be used to quickly ferry supplies ashore. It also took away 71 sick or wounded men back to Rabaul that she reached on the 6th of October, and the remains of 13 dead bodies. This left 285 men on the island, most of whom were fatigued by malaria. On the 13th, the submarine returned with more supplies, but Allied intelligence was aware of these, so a RAAF Hudson of No. 32 Squadron was sent to the area. The sighting of the plane that started dropping flares and bombs made the submarine go away, leaving behind the landing craft. 2 days later, on the 15th, the Japanese were able to receive a radio message that alerted them that the Allied were probably going to invade Goodenough Island. In the meantime, the Allied Supreme Commander of the Southwest Pacific Area, General Douglas MacArthur, issued new orders on the 1st of October. Our forces in the Southwest Pacific Area will attack with the immediate objective of driving the Japanese to the northward of the Kumusi River line. The New Guinea force will advance along the axis Nauru Kokoda Wairopi and Rigo Dorabizolo Yaure Wairopi and or Abau Numudi Yaure Wairopi Trail, both inclusive, with the objective of securing the line of the Kumusi River from Awalama Divide to the crossing of the Kokoda Buna Trail, both inclusive. Occupy and hold Goodenough Island and the north coast of southeastern New Guinea, south of Cape Nelson, in such force as to deny these areas to the Japanese forces. Upon securing these objectives, all land forces will prepare for further advance to secure the area Bunagona upon further orders of these headquarters. Operation Drake, the Allied operation to secure Goodenough Island, was starting. The 2nd 12th Infantry Battalion, that we already met in Milne Bay, was tasked with the operation. They boarded the destroyer HMAS Stewart and HMAS Arunta on the 22nd of October, and they landed on the south of Goodenough Island the same night. 520 men under Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Arnold landed at Mud Bay, while 120 men from C Company under Major Key Gategood landed at Taleba Bay. Interesting to note that they had a various assortment of boats used to land, from ketches to whaleboats and even 3 captured Japanese landing crafts, I presume some of the ones abandoned at Milne Bay that could have been repaired. Guided by a local policeman, parts of the Mud Bay force departed towards Kilia, and guess what? They were under heavy rain. At 8:30 in the morning, as the Australians were half a mile from Kilia, they encountered the Japanese. The Aussies were ambushed by machine guns and by grenades being thrown at them, and they pulled back. At 6 a.m. in the meantime, the Taleba Bay force had captured an enemy machine gun. 2 platoons were sent to clear the southern tip but suffered heavy casualties as the Japanese did, at 9 a.m., a violent counterattack. The Japanese may have been starving and suffering from diseases, but their fighting spirit was surely not gone. Under mortar and machine gun fire, the Australians started to fall back and were forced to re-embark on their ships, having lost 6 killed, 10 wounded and 3 missing in action. In the meantime, the Mud Bay force was under Japanese planes attack, and the Australians were strafed as well as one of the ketch that was carrying the wounded soldier was attacked. A company tried to flank, but they got lost in the jungle. During the night, the Japanese evacuated the island to Ferguson Island on board of 2 landing crafts, and from there 261 men were picked up by the light cruiser Tenyu the day after. On the morning, the 212 found their enemy position empty and realized the Japs had left. In the end, the Australians lost 13 deaths and 19 wounded, while the Japanese lost 20 killed, 15 wounded and some missing in action, as not everyone was able to evacuate, and a handful of soldiers were later captured in the following years or died of disease in the jungle. In the following months, some American engineers started constructing an airstrip called Viviani Airfield, and the first place to land there were 6 Bristol Beauforts from No. 100 Air AAF Squadron on the 17th of May 1943. On the 31st of December 1942, the 212 Battalion left the island, leaving behind only 75 men, who had the task of doing a deception operation to trick the Japanese in thinking that there was an entire brigade on the island. They did this by creating fake weapon emplacement, barbed wire, fake radios transmission, and even creating extra large fires to give the idea of cooking for a lot of men. In the end, it worked, as the Japanese did not return by their will on Goodenough Island. There were, in fact, some shipwrecked sailors and soldiers after the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. Responding to reports from Angao, the police and civilian informants, patrols searched the island for Japanese survivors. Between the 8th and the 14th of March 1943, the 47th Infantry Battalion located and killed 72 Japanese, captured around 40, and found another 9 dead on the raft. A patrol under Captain Joseph Pascoe killed 8 Japanese who had landed in 2 flat-bottom boats. In the boats, they found documents in sealed tins. On translation by the Allied translator and interpreter section, one document turned out to be a copy of the Japanese army list with the names and postings of every officer. It, therefore, provided a complete order of battle of the Japanese army, including many units never previously reported. Moreover, a mention of any Japanese officer could now be correlated with his units. Copies were made available to intelligence units in every theater of war against Japan. And as you may understand, this was quite an important achievement. During the rest of the war, the island would be upgraded even more to support the operation in that part of the Pacific. But now, it's time to go back on the mainland, on the Kokoda track. After the Australian victory at Ira Creek, the advance was very slow, and because of this, the Allied changed. On the 29th of October, the commanding general of the 7th Division withdrew position, going from Major General Arthur Allen to Major General George Vasey. Vasey had arrived on the field on the 27th, and by then the Japanese were basically in a full-blown retreat. In the early afternoon on the 30th, some men of the 2first entered Aurora without any opposition, and the leading men were thrusting towards Isoava. The 25th Brigade in the meantime was advancing slowly, as the terrain was very steep and in thick jungle. Australian soldiers were exhausted, but they were still carrying on, and the fact that the terrain was becoming more flat surely did help. The Aussies divided themselves into columns. On the left, the 25th Brigade was advancing towards Kokoda, while the 16th Brigade plus the 3rd Battalion were advancing towards Oiwi. On the morning of the 12th of the 2nd of November, a patrol from the 231st under Lieutenant Black was able to enter Kokoda itself, and they found it empty. By 4 p.m, Brigadier Ito was there with his advanced headquarters, and the other 2 battalions were approaching just behind. From the following day, supplies started being airdropped, while the engineers started working on repairing the airfield. This, of course, had the logistical side of the situation. and the Australian flag could now fly once again on Kokoda. In the meantime, the 16th Brigade was starting to have contacts with the Japanese. The 31st Japanese Regiment was manning the front line, while the Battle 144th was acting as a reserve, and Major General Hori's headquarters was at Gorari. The 2nd and the 2nd 3rd had found the Japanese defenses on the track near Oiwi, and soon realized that it was the place where the Japanese had decided to take a stand and fight, after being under pressure from Nipponic machine guns. On the plus side for the Aussies was the fact that, thanks to the newly liberated airstrip, mortar ammo was now plentiful and could be used in almost every occasion, making the life of their fellow men in the front line much easier by inflicting a lot of Japanese casualties. The 2nd 1st in the meantime had found a track that ran parallel to the main one some kilometers south, and started going down on it in an attempt to flank the Japanese. On this track, the Japanese were almost nowhere to be found, so Major General Vesey decided to commit the 25th Brigade to a flanking maneuver. This was also because on the left flank, where the 16th Brigade was stationed, the enemy resistance was fierce and casualties started mounting. Luckily for the Australians, a main dressing station MDS was established by the 2/4 Field Ambulance at Kokoda, where the men could hope for reasonably comfortable condition if they became casualties. The conditions were still poor, with many instances of patients lying on the ground, but at the same time it was better than nothing. Also, injured Australians could now be evacuated by plane to Port Moresby, and this also helped the MDS in being able to manage less casualties. In the meantime, the 2nd 1st was advancing on a parallel track with the objective of reaching Ilimo. Sadly for them, a combination of drawing intel from the natives in the area and the thick vegetation almost made them lost, so they went back to Linney's Corner, a position to the south of Gorari, named after Lieutenant Linney, the commander of A Company of the 2nd 1st. On the 6th of November, Vesey made the final decision. The 16th would pin the Japanese at Oiwi, while the 25th Brigade, plus the 2nd, would flank the Japanese and attack Gorari. Lieutenant Colonel Miller, the commander of the 231st, was tasked to seize Gorari on the 8th of November. The Aussies were in a wonderful position now, as they could probably encircle the whole Japanese forces and destroy them in a single battle. Also, the 2nd 1st was tasked with moving towards Ilimo. On the morning of the 8th, the US Air Force showed up and started bombing and strafing the Japanese position at Oiwi. Two captains from the 16th Brigade brought for this occasion. One morning we got US air support. We had been supported by them once before at Yura Creek, but they had frightened us more than they had the Japanese. Now we were to have help again. They bombed the feature with reasonable accuracy and strafed Oiwi village behind. The Japs, however, were so well dug in that we doubted whether the air support would be effective. But in any case, the Yanks didn't hit us on this occasion. The 16th Brigade was, in the meantime, suffering heavy casualties, mainly due to enemy snipers in the area. The 3rd Battalion lost on the 8th of November 7 killed and 5 wounded, but the Japanese had another problems to think about, as on the 8th the 25th Brigade started its attack. The following day, the 2nd 31st and the 2nd 25th, that were suffering heavy casualties, especially the latter, with 14 killed and 22 wounded in a single day, encircled enemy units near Baribe, that is a small village between Gorari and Linney's Corner. These encircled units were probably part of the 2nd and 3rd Battalion of the 144th Japanese Regiment, as it had the job of defending Major General Hori's headquarters, the rear areas and Gorari itself. These two battalions had units in the area for a long time, as some of their battles had been found by the 2nd when they first found the parallel track some days prior. It is also possible that after those patrols were encountered, Japanese reinforcements had been sent to the area. In the meantime, the 2nd 33rd Battalion was advancing between the position of the 144th Regiment and the 41st Regiment. The 31st, after noticing enemy movements in the rear area, started to redeploy its southernmost battalion, while the 1st Battalion of the 144th basically disintegrated and its components fled north to the jungle. The Australian 2nd 33rd then started to attack towards the east, against the headquarters of the Southeast Detachment. In the meantime, the 2nd was attacking to the east, and this unit too was attacking Major General Hori's headquarters. The following day, the 2nd 31st swinged around the 2nd to cut the track further east. Australian casualties in the flanking force, that is the 25th Brigade and the 2nd Battalion, were rising, with 34 killed and 118 wounded from the 8th to the 10th. However, the Japanese were in a situation that was way worse. The 231st was able to overrun some units of the 55th Mountain Artillery Regiment, and the Australians reported killing 89 enemies and a capture of a mountain gun, 2 machine guns, ammunition and documents. Also, the 2nd 25th captured a lot of enemy equipment, such as mortars and machine guns. The Japanese had in the headquarters area more men, but those were understandably of lesser fighting capabilities, being those administrative units, logistical units and artillerymen. The Australians had in contrast veteran frontline units that were advancing with a great impetus. The area quickly became a killing ground. On the 11th, the 16th Brigade was able to move forward as the Japanese 41st Regiment was starting to crack as they were surrounded. Men of the 31st Regiment tried to force, on the 11th and 12th of November, the Australian 25th Brigade, but with little success. Major General Hoy had ordered a withdrawal, but the situation was now hopeless. They were very low on ammo, the men were exhausted by the low amount of food available, and they were surrounded. Some units, especially from the headquarters and support units, were able to flee to the east, but the main part of the South Seas Detachment had to fight their way out. The only escape route was towards the Kumusi River, but the Australians had in the area some units of the 21st Battalion and some Papuan Infantry Battalion soldiers that kept the Japanese under pressure. The units of the Emperor of the Rising Sun tried to flee on the river with small barges, but a lot of them drowned, including the Japanese commander himself, Major General Tamitaro Hoy. He would later be posthumously promoted to Lieutenant General. The Japanese had been defeated, and the Kokura Toa campaign had ended in an astonishing Allied victory. The Battle of Uivi-Gorari marked the end of the Kokura Toa campaign, but not the end of the fighting in the Papua New Guinea. Japanese Colonel Yazawa was able to regroup several hundred of survivors who survived the rafting at the mouth of the river. These men would later take part in the fighting near Bunagona. From the 13th to the 15th of November, the Australians struggled in building a small bridge to cross the Kumusi River near Wairopi, and in the end they were able to establish a beachhead with a company. On the 16th, the Aussies were able to finish their crossing, and the Japanese were continuing their retreat, as not all units had used the way on the Kumusi River, with some deciding to walk all the way near the river. In early December, Japanese reinforcements reached Bunagona, and the Japs had in the area the remainings of the 31st and 144th Regiment, plus the 229th Regiment, artillery, engineers, and units of the 5th Yokosuka Special Naval Landing Force. The Allied were able to muster 4 American regiments, 126th, 127th, 128th, and 163rd, and 6 Australian brigades, the 14th, 16th, 18th, 21st, 25th, and 30th, at various strength, as some had just seen combat, such as the 16th and the 25th, so they were depleted. This battle, of course, deserves a special episode on its own. Yes, because even if the first season of Waterloo Operation ends here, the videos on the battles in and around Papua New Guinea do not end. We will do, in the coming years, some bonus episodes, and rest assured that one of these will be on the Battle of Bunagona. After the battle at Uivi-Gorari, the Japanese had lost around 430 killed and 500 plus wounded, and they lost a lot of heavy equipment that could not have been evacuated by raft, such as 14 artillery pieces, machine guns and mortars. Against this, the Aussies lost 121 killed and 225 wounded. After the war, a battle honor was awarded to Australian units for their involvement in fighting around Uivi-Gorari. This was designated, understandably, Uivi-Gorari. This battle honor was awarded to the 3rd, to 1st, to 2nd, to 3rd, to 25th, to 31st, and to 33rd Infantry Battalion. A couple of words on the campaign before we end the video. The Kokura Toa campaign lasted for around 4 months and ended in basically a complete defeat for the invaders. The Japanese plan was bold in concept and vigorous in execution, yet it failed for a number of different reasons. The logistical side was terrible and that drained a lot of manpower in order to fill the gaps of carriers, and obviously because of the casualties that could be connected to starvation. The operation at Min Bay, while it had a logic behind, it became a waste of resources that could have been used elsewhere. The main sinkhole for resources was, however, Guadalcanal. Also, the Japanese were facing a very adaptable foe that was able to hold the line at first with some untrained units, such as the Papuan Infantry Battalion or the military battalions, such as the 39th, the 53rd, and then the 3rd Battalion later during the counter-offensive. This gives the stallion time to bring in more experienced units that were able to slow down the Japanese advance even more and conduct a fighting withdrawal in one of the worst, geographically speaking, theater of war against one of the most violent forces in the war. The Japanese committed around 6,000 men in total, while the Australians were able to somewhat rotate the various units in the fight. From the 22nd of July, the number of Australian casualties was 103 officers and 1,577 men, with 39 officers and 586 men killed in action. The number of killed, including the early weeks engagement with the 39th and 53rd Battalion, brings the number of killed to 30 officers and 670 men. These numbers do not include the various sickness casualties, as those are hard to calculate, as no accurate record exists. The Allies learned a lot from this campaign, especially when it comes to training their units for jungle fighting, when it comes to logistics and the use of air power, both as a force to interdict and annoy the enemy, and also a way to ease the logistical situation on their own side. Will the Allies use this freshly learned knowledge in the following fights, both in Papua New Guinea and in other parts of the world? To answer this question, well, you will simply have to wait for further videos on the Pacific front. This brings an end to our video. We really hope that you have enjoyed both these episodes and the entire series. Please consider subscribing if you do wish seeing other Warfare Operation series season, as you can even suggest in the comments what campaign you would like to see. The next one will be in a different era and in a different part of the world, so stay tuned if you would like to know more. Thank you for watching, and remember to always try to cut in half the enemy position in order to destroy them entirely.